What that 1-1 draw means is that Chelsea leapfrog Arsenal into fourth. They are level on points with the Gunners. Liverpool are back at the top of the table after Manchester City's defeat by Bournemouth. Forest are third after picking up another 3 points against West Ham. Newcastle round out the top half, just 3 points between 4th and 10th. It is very congested. Manchester United climb into 13th after their point against Chelsea. Southampton got their first win of the season, but they stay in the bottom three. Wolves and Ipswich also got a point each, but they remain winless after 10 games. What a weekend it was. I feel like there are stories around this weekend that we're probably not going to touch on that in any other week would be massive. And we're not really going to talk that much about Southampton's win against Everton, which I think is huge. But all eyes were on Old Trafford because Manchester United... Sorry, Rachel Corsie and Hello. You know who they are. They're old friends. It's all fine. But I just feel like this weekend, there were so many stories around. But still, all eyes were on Old Trafford because we're looking at the size of the job ahead of Ruben Amorim. And I don't think we learned anything more, but we maybe learned that bounce for Ruud van Nistelrooy in midweek with the 5-2 win against Leicester was just a bounce. It didn't sort of signify anything particularly. Not really. As you said, the bounce in the week and Ruud, and to be fair to him, he tried everything as well. The fist pumps and the energy was high, and I'm sure there was a lot of excitement about him taking the reins, certainly that game against Chelsea, but I thought the game maybe flattered to deceive. I think for the neutrals, they almost want Ruud to kind of win every single game. So there's that little bit of discontent when Ruben Amorim comes in. I know it's maybe the pessimist to me. You just want to keep the narrative going, don't you? Yeah. Like, I want Ruud to win all the games, and then Amorim come and all of a sudden it's, oh, really? What do we do now? Because Ruud's been so good. But, I mean, as I said, I expected more from the game. Although those games never really live up to the billing, I think Manchester United are still stuck in that same place.
Who do you think picked the team for that? Because if Amorim is in place, surely he should want to have a look at the players before he gets there. How are they playing? Who's playing for me? Who's running around? Who do you think picked the team? I still think Ruud probably picked the team. I think because there's still much a bit of a gap between Amorim coming in. I still think that's Ruud's team, and Amorim's still got stuff to do at Sporting, I believe. So I do think that's Ruud's team. But I think the closer we get to his appointment, then maybe 1 or 2 conversations will come in. It's a little bit like the England scenario of Graham Potter and Thomas Tuchel. Because it's so far away, I still think it's going to be... Maybe the next internationals are different because there's less games. But I think in this situation, that was all Ruud's team, I believe. Eddie Boothroyd and Thomas Tuchel. Yeah. No, they've got Graham Potter. Oh, that's right. He didn't get it. Yeah, that's right. I apologise for that. Lee Carsley. Not Eddie Boothroyd. I've got to the other 21s. Lee Carsley and Thomas Tuchel, because there's very few international games. Welcome to our extremely knowledgeable football programme about it. When you said that, I was like... Did I say Potter? Kelly's never wrong. I just think I'm never wrong. Say it with confidence and people will come along with you. Look, that kind of actually leads quite nicely into the Manchester United under Ruud van Nistelrooy era, because Amorim will be looking back at these games, not just the ones under Van Nistelrooy, but previously, be getting an idea of these players. And I'm not sure, looking at this performance, because the question was always, how good is this squad? I'm not sure he will have learned too much more from this game than he could have gleaned from any of the previous ones. Yeah, but the reality is he probably needs to get in there and see the day-to-day. I think it's really tough to just, we sit on the outside and we just measure everyone based on the performances in the match day, but so much goes on through the week. I think that definitely would have just been all Ruud at the weekend there, but the benefit Ruud will also be getting is all the players know they're essentially on this trial period, because the manager will be watching, and until he's in the day-to-day and seeing everything, he will be starting to pick up some sort of ultimately perceptions on what he thinks of the players. So I think Ruud will benefit from that, just in that players give a bit more. When you know the manager's changing, someone new coming in, you have that. You're either in the team, you're like, I need to keep my place, or you're not in the team, you think, well, this is my chance to maybe get your foot in the door. I suppose the other thing is that Ruud wants to be part of the backroom staff. He's been saying... Well, he's on trial, exactly. As well. Yeah. So he is, if you like, auditioning for a place in that backroom staff along with the players. So he's probably saying to the players, we're all in this together. We all got to make a good impression. And he's got to show that he can be that connector. That's the word that's been used, connector, between what will be a new group of people coming in and the players who are trying to remain a part of the plans.
Do you know as well, though, also with Ruud, it's not just about what happens with Amorim. I think it's longer term than that, because Amorim might come in, and I'd have no problem with Amorim came in and said, listen, Ruud, I know you're a Manchester United legend, you're part of the fabric, but I need people around me I can trust. I don't necessarily know you that well. But if Ruud has a good account of himself in these games, who knows? I mean, there could be managerial changes very soon. All of a sudden, you look at what he did at Manchester United, which is seen as almost like a poison chalice, and it might be like, well, he managed to motivate those players. They look better under Ruud van Nistelrooy, so we'll give him a go. So it's not just about what he does with Amorim. I think it's his next job as well.
That's a good point, because he fits the role. You look at him on the touchline, he's a good communicator. He comes across really well. Sporting directors and owners and chairmen, they'll probably be looking at him and the impact that he has on the players and says, yeah, we can have him.
But then I'm wondering what that impact is, because it kind of what you've been saying underlines how difficult a line that is to walk for Ruud van Nistelrooy, between doing well enough that he sells himself in terms of being part of the backroom staff, but if he does too well, then he plays himself into contention as a possible first-team coach, which, if you're Ruben Amorim, you don't want somebody sitting behind you on the bench every match day going, well, if it doesn't go well for him, I'm here. It's like, no, but we've seen assistant managers and we've seen coaching staff do that before, where you worry that they're thinking, or if you're the manager, you're worrying that if you wobble, they're not feeling your pain. They're thinking, this could be a little door opening for me. It's a difficult line for him to walk.
Yeah, and I think people started to speculate, even in Ten Hag's last few games, who is the manager here? Because Ruud probably showed that little bit of character that he has, in terms he was sort of up off his seat, on the edge of his seat, ready to kind of give some direction. That will ultimately play out, I think, for him as well. Whatever he wants, you'll ultimately want to do well. If you're in that position, you're like, you want to do well. You have that competitiveness inside you, that even if you think through one lens, you might think, well, this could harm me. Then there's that underlying thing of, well, I'm currently the interim manager of Manchester United, and I want to win. And I think you got to just stay true to that and do the best. And whatever happens in the future will happen. And he obviously wants to have a future in management, and he's had a good start to that. He's developed his sort of philosophy and his trade, and he'll be learning too. So I think it's quite simple in the sense of, you can overcomplicate it, but he ultimately wants to win. So that's his number one focus, I think.
Yeah. Just to go back to your point, Darren, on Ruud van Nistelrooy wanting to prove that he can change that group of players. It was only one change from Ten Hag's last starting 11. So the personnel weren't very different.
No.
Was the style of football very different? Were there any... I mean, look, it's not been a long time, so there will be small differences. But were they there, did you think?
I didn't see much difference, I have to say. There's a little bit of intensity, maybe, but not much difference. Still a little bit uncertain at the back. Still not much more potency in the final third. I saw a commitment to what he wants to do, but that's not enough. They need more quality, they need more penetration, they need more incisiveness. They just don't have that. And that's a big part of the reason why there is a feeling that Amorim might come in and bring players from around Europe. He said that he won't go for Gyökeres, who scores goals for fun, in January, but he might well do that next summer. The one thing that has struck me from watching so far this season, one or two of the forwards in that Man United side, I don't know if they're ready for Man United yet. I think they should have maybe been at a Tottenham or an Aston Villa, really scoring goals before making that jump to Manchester United. I think it's too soon for them. There are others in that Man United side squad that are underachieving and perhaps might not be long for, or much longer in the Man United squad. Set against all of that, what Amorim does have a good track record for is improving players. So he'll be looking to see who has the capacity to improve in my system, who works hard, who works for the team, who puts that team ethic before themselves. I think there'll be a lot of that, but I'm fairly convinced that quite a few of those players will be gone by next summer, and Amorim's team will probably maybe have 6 or 7 of those players, and the rest in that squad
and we
might
saw
eventually
again
be moved on.
Yesterday, that goal scoring, as you said there, has been a huge problem for Manchester United. If you're Rasmus Højlund, and there's clearly talent there, it's but as Darren said, it may be just that he's at an earlier stage in his development. But if you're Rasmus Højlund, he had one touch in the box yesterday, and that was when they won the penalty. But if you're him, what do you want from the rest of the team? Is he getting enough? Would he be right in feeling isolated and not supported?
A little bit, because I 100% agree with what Darren's saying, because when you look at Rasmus Højlund, clearly there's talent there, but he was never brought in, I think, to be the #1 striker. Now, it takes a lot to wear that shirt. I mean, look at the guy who's in charge now, Ruud van Nistelrooy, one of the best to do it. We've seen Rooney there, we've seen Tevez, we saw Bob Berber, who was at Tottenham first before he went to Manchester United, and he was one of the best as well. But I think for Rasmus Højlund, and I put Xerxes in that a little bit as well, is that they're in a situation where they don't know what they're going to get for their wide players, and that's a big. There's no chemistry or connection there. And the reason I say that is because when you get Garnacho the ball, his first thought is, can I score first? And if that's not an option, can I get a shot off? If that's not an option, then maybe I'll look to create. So that's the third option. For Rashford, he's a little bit in between, where he probably wants to shoot first, or his confidence is not quite there to go past someone and make something happen. So effectively, the two wide players were what you used to say was the ammunition for the centre forward. When you've got two wide players that don't know what they're going to do, and also their first thought was not about Rasmus Højlund, they're looking after themselves, you feel a little bit sorry for them. Now, a more experienced centre forward would know how to kind of maybe hoax that a little bit by speaking to the wide men or getting himself in certain areas where a cross shot or in and about where the ball might drop. Because Rasmus Højlund's at the start of his journey, he's finding it really tough. So unless Amorim comes in and gets an experienced striker. Now, Gyökeres, I'm a big fan of his. Watched him in the Championship for Coventry. That is a big jump from Coventry to Sporting to Manchester United. That you might find yourself having the same problems, although you've been scoring problems.
People say that they should have bought him from Sporting. Why didn't they buy him instead of Sporting? If he'd have gone from Coventry to Man United, he'd have been finished.
Exactly.
He would not have coped.
No.
So that's exactly my point. You've got to go to the mid-ranking side where you can find your stride and then go to a Manchester United rather than going straight away. Jota's a really good example of what you're talking about, of someone who can connect with the wide players, drop deep, receive the ball, bring other people into the play. Xerxes and Højlund, they're not Manchester United players.
But if they had those wingers, those wing-backs rather, that he likes to play, Amorim likes those wingers who really... Does that help?
That would help, because that's where the service is coming from. Because even in Liverpool's perspective, with Salah or Luis Diaz, at least you know what they're going to do. If you're the centre forward in that team, you go, well, there's quality there. If Salah cuts back, he's obviously going to clip it to that back post. So you kind of get that understanding. With Manchester United, because you don't have a clue what they're doing, you need the supply line to come from fullback. So, again, at Liverpool, when you've got Trent and Robertson, if Salah and Luis Diaz are not doing it, at least you go, well, I know their service is coming from the fullbacks. At Manchester United with Xerxes and Rasmus Højlund, you don't know where it's coming from, because even Fernandes at the point, he's on the cusp, he'll have a shot. You just don't know where your next supply line's coming from. So I think that's a really, really good point, and it's a big issue for certainly the centre forwards.
But I think that comes to then the discipline of the players, respecting where they are. I think Garnacho and Rashford, they play like they're playing for Man United, who are fourth in the table. You're playing for Man United, who aren't there. You're in the bottom half. And therefore, for me, the service comes... You think about Jota when he was at Wolves, he understood his role when he played in the wide area, when he played in the 9. You know, you might only get one touch in the opposition half. You might only get 3 opportunities to cross it. You cross it, you don't... And that becomes the role, because you're working on transition. You're knowing that every time we break into the half, we're trying to make something happen. And I think that is a reason why, if those players aren't going to do that job, where Man United are right now, then they possibly then put themselves out of the team. And I actually think, going back to the setup, I actually think Man United are probably getting some scrutiny after the performance, because I think Ruud went, we're playing a back 4 with 2 in front, and we're going to be more compact. And I think that was effective, but I think it did highlight how ineffective then the team is at quickly transitioning to create opportunities that lead to goals.
Do you know as well, that's a good point, because even for Rasmus Højlund, not so much Xerxes, because I think he's more of a 10 anyway. But if you watch Rasmus Højlund's movement, it's good. Like, he makes the intelligent runs, he's in between the fullback and the centre half, he gets to that near post, but he makes the run, and there's nothing more frustrating for a centre forward when you make the run into the box and the wide man chops back, and then you've got to adjust, and then they cross it. And that comes down to timing. And again, I don't care how good you are, how talented you are as a centre forward, if your connection is off with the wide players, you'll never score many goals.
Ruud van Nistelrooy's talked about that with Paul Scholes, and he's exactly that situation where he's like, it's just all down to the timing, and especially if you're making short runs, you need to have somebody who understands where you're going to be. That's what Ruud van Nistelrooy was saying. I obviously have no experience of that whatsoever. And I think your point about who they might look for and where in the market, and it goes back to what Darren was saying as well, Rachel, is a really, really interesting one, because it's not just about people talk about learning to deal with being a Manchester United player, and obviously that is a factor. But it's also about learning your role at clubs where different things are required of you. So there is a positional discipline that's instilled in you. I think that's a really interesting point that sort of ties in with what Darren was saying.
Yeah, and you have to learn that, and I think for some players, you look at Rashford, he's been at Man United a long time, and he has been there when the team has been up at that end of the table, and I think he probably is someone that people find frustrating to watch because he has this huge ability, and we just haven't probably seen the best of him in the last couple of years. But I do also think needs to be a psychological switch in your mind when you go on the pitch to just recognise we need to rebuild ourselves back there. We can't just leapfrog ourselves back there. And I think sometimes that is also why the performances seem, you see that 5-2 and you think, oh, here we go. Is this something to be optimistic about? And then you go into, the 1-1 game where you're a bit like, oh, it was a bit sticky. And then you're sort of thinking, well, I'm not sure what we're going to get
But
this
as a
week.
centre-half, wouldn't you be... Man United for 20 years had strikers, forwards, attackers who had centre-halves thinking, I'm going to have a tough day today. Whether it was Tevez, whether it's Rooney, whether it was Andy Cole, Dwight York. But over the years and years, they proved themselves at an Aston Villa, at a Newcastle, at a West Ham, wherever. Berbatov at Spurs before you got to Man United. Man United's got to be potentially the last place you come, because you have earned the right to be there. And I look at Højlund's body of work. He's a promising player, and I don't want to be...
And that's all he was brought in to
disrespectful
be.
about
That
him.
Man United were quite clear about that. He is a future talent.
But he wasn't there yet, and that's my point. I think that by the time you get there, us guys in the media, we've got to be saying, they've got this guy. Like Real Madrid, you don't get to Real Madrid if you're promising. You get to Real Madrid if you're ready. And once you get there, you're expected to deliver. You're expected to give centre-halves problems. You're expecting to have a tough day. Højlund think, I'm going to have a tough day today. And I think that's the big issue. You look at Haaland and you think that. You look at Jota, you look at...
But one of I think the difference there though as well is one of the reasons why centre backs have a tough day because it's relentless.
Yes.
You have to defend. You can't stop for a second. You wonder if they're going off your shoulder. You clear the ball, it comes back again. Man United don't dominate teams very often. So these centre backs are supposed to be having a tough day. They've actually got the ball.
Yeah.
So I know as a player, when we dominate possession, irrelevant of who I'm playing against, I get that breather, I get the opportunity to be calm. You play a few passes, you feel into it, you think I'm okay. And then you might have 5-10 minutes where, we're up against it yet. Then you have the ball again. And that Man United don't... Højlund spends as much time or more time defending than he does actually making runs for him. So it's almost... There's not the opportunity for him to have that sort of dominance. I don't think he is maybe the type of player. I think that's something he'll develop. But at the same time, he's not really getting as much chance to develop it week in, week out because Man United aren't in a position where they dominate most teams. No.
It's going to be interesting to see the personnel and how he uses that when he comes in. But I also want to look at the games he's got coming up because it's about expectations. It's about managing the Manchester United fan base, getting them on board early on. And these are his first 10 games when he comes into the club.
So definitely listened to that first one.
Well,
That's where that first one's coming from.
You're going, I'm going. We'll be there to see how it looks. But then he'll have had 13 days because he goes in on the 11th of November. But there's an international break, so not everybody will be there. But quite quickly, they've got Arsenal. They've got Nottingham Forest, who are in third place at the moment. Who have had a really good start to the season, and then it's a Manchester derby on the 15th of December. Look, and I know you can, and then they've got Tottenham again in the League Cup. That's still to come. What Manchester United fans, from what I've been reading around, various chats online, what they want to see first and foremost is that the team is competitive against their major rivals, not necessarily blowing everybody away straight away, but that they look like they've got a plan.
Yeah.
These feel like quite basic requirements. They look like they've got a plan, and that they're competitive against their big rivals. Doesn't seem like a lot to ask for.
No, but what does I think some fans say this, but what does looking like there's a plan look like? I think most fans just want Man United to win more. And I actually think we can throw sort of football terminology of like style of play and systems and all these things. But I think there's actually a bigger reward if you can find a winning system. And I think they're one win in the last 6 league games. And no fan, that you might still have a plan. So you could be like, We've got a plan. We've definitely got a plan like you asked for. But if the return is still 1 win in 6 games, I don't think fans will be that happy.
I think to add to what you've both been saying, I wonder if the biggest thing that Amram has to do when he arrives is be a good communicator. And by that I mean this. When Klopp came to the club, he had to Liverpool, he had people eating out of his hand almost immediately because he had a very clear idea of what he wanted to do, what he expected of the players, and he wasn't just talking to the media, he was talking to the fan base, and he electrified them fairly quickly. If you look at Arteta, I think Arsenal were 15th after 16 games in his second season. But he was very clear about what he wanted to do. He wanted to move some of the older, underachieving players out, and he wanted to bring through younger, hungry players. The documentary was really good in sort of embellishing that as well. This is where we're going. This is what we want to do. I have a memory of the whiteboard with all of the names of the players that he wanted and the ones he wanted to move out. You could see what they were trying to do. And I think that articulated their plan as much as anything else. I think Man United fans will need to see reasons for optimism. They'll need to see what he's going to do. And by all accounts, Cristiano Ronaldo refers to Amram as the poet because he's got such a good way with words. And I think he's got to have that charisma behind, whether it's the Manchester United lectern, whether it's on one-to-one interviews with us in the media. I was going to say print or TV, but it's us. We're all in the same industry. Because if he can do that, I think that he will take Man United fans with him. I don't think Ten Hag ever had that charisma to electrify fans in the same way that other Manchester United managers, other Premier League managers were able to do. If he can do that, he's got a really good chance.
Comes back to that point that you've been making as well about players developing so that they're at Manchester United, but also being realistic about where they are and not being challenging for the league title in so long, being maybe something of a cup team at the moment, but still having to take on the mantle of it being a club the size of Manchester United, and how you manage that. What a weekend, what a Saturday. And it started with that game for Arsenal against Newcastle. Look, credit to Newcastle, and it was a really good header from Isak as well to put them in front. But wobbles at Arsenal?
Yeah, I would suggest so. I think the performances haven't been that great, but I think that's been the case for a while now. I mean, I go back to 2 years ago where Arsenal playing this free-flowing football when they first challenged. It was fantastic. Last season was still a bit more workmanlike with a couple of those performances in where it was sparkling. This season, I think it's been all workmanlike. Now, I think it's quite naive to just say that's Odegaard being missing because he's that creativity. I just don't think Arsenal have been good enough this season in terms of transition and in possession. I think they've been a little bit predictable as well, a lack of intensity, too much being placed on Saka. And they look a little bit tired, not physically, but mentally as well. But I think they're going to have to get out of this period quickly because, I mean, Liverpool don't look like they're slowing down. Yes, Manchester City was a slight wobble, but I think when you look at the Premier League table and the teams that are up to the top 6, even down to maybe 8, I think they can all take points off everyone. We've seen Forest go to Anfield and win games. We've seen Chelsea under Maresca. Eddie Howe's just obviously beating Arsenal. Spurs under Ange, you know what you're going to get there. So I do think Arsenal, yes, when the injuries come back, will make a big difference. But they just look like, to me, not that they need a breather, but they're almost void of ideas.
But I think that's a really interesting point because having followed the last few title campaigns and how dominant Manchester City have been in that time, how much the competitors, whether it's Liverpool or whether it's Arsenal, have had to push them in those seasons. For Arsenal to have done that for a couple of seasons and not got the reward, have you seen that in previous seasons, that takes a lot out of teams, of squads?
I agree. And I think to add to that, when Rodri was ruled out for the season and City having lost, keep saying lost, and they chose to sell Alvarez. But the fact that Rodri, who is arguably the most important part of their side, out for the season, suddenly everyone's pivoting to Arsenal. We thought we could win it, now we definitely believe they could win it. Are they labouring under the expectation, the pressure of that expectation? Because one or two of the things that have happened this season really struck me. When Saliba was sent off against Bournemouth, it was because he was second to a ball being played backwards by a normally forward-facing player, Trossard. Why would you make a decision like that? I think last season Trossard would have been playing that ball forward. This season, suddenly they're overthinking things that came naturally to them when they were doing really well last season. I I don't think that their issues relate to they should have bought a striker because they scored 5 fewer goals than Manchester City last season. So I don't think they've got problems scoring goals. Added to that, defences win you titles, not necessarily strikers. The team with the best defence invariably wins a title.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Robin Van Persie would beg to differ.
He might do, but he might want to look at his team's defence that season because it was outstanding. And I think Arsenal did really well in terms of bringing in the personnel that could deputise for Saliba in that time. I just think the issue is mental. And I think that they're struggling with that expectation.
Do you know what, the cracks are starting to appear, and you look at certain people's characters, and Declan Rice was one who, for West Ham, and since he's been at Arsenal, has been almost the model professional, kicking the ball away. I know it's petulant, but you think you've already been booked, get sent off for that. Even Trossard, knowing what had happened to Declan Rice a couple of weeks before, him kicking the ball away, you think, this is decision makings. And even the Saliba one, that was probably the real eye-opener, because someone who's really calm and composed, in and out of possession, defends well, never really dives in. Usually, the ball goes over his head, he'd back himself with his pace to get back, take the ball, and then do what he does, which is being calm and composed, as I just said. For him to grab, it almost like he panicked as well. So you're seeing these little instances, people making decisions but they wouldn't usually do. Now, Daz made a good point about Rodri. It's almost like people expect Man City to win the league because they've got all the best players, they've got the best manager. When you take Rodri out the team and Alvarez left, and people turned to us and went, right, this is your time now, there's no more excuses because they've lost players. This is Arne Slot's first season, so maybe he's going to take time to adjust. It's now Arsenal's time. You have to go and win the league. It's almost like they've, and it obviously kind of pains me to say it, but shrunk under that pressure now all of a sudden, because it's like, well, whoa, Liverpool winning games, Man City are doing what they're doing. And again, they're making decisions that they wouldn't usually do. A couple of seasons ago, they wouldn't. Last season, they wouldn't. This season, they're doing it. And I just think, again, maybe the pressure is a little bit too much for them.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but we'll come back to this because we're going to talk about City in a second as well, about this idea of control and whether sometimes that can almost hamper sides a little bit in terms of expressing themselves. We'll come to that in a second. But I wanted to ask you, Darren, about Edu, who is going to be leaving Arsenal and joining Nottingham Forest, reportedly trebling his wages in the process. So I don't know what tempted him, but it kind of...
I'm just trying to find his agent's number.
Exactly. Will that have an impact on Arsenal now, or is it something that will affect them further down the line? What do you think?
Well, as a manager, what you want is to be in a set of circumstances where you're working hand in glove with the person who supports you most. So, for example, Unai Emery has that with Damien Vidigani and with Monchi at Aston Villa. Arteta has got, and he's lost his big ally, Chiki Begiristain and Soriano at Manchester City with Guardiola. The relationship between the two, Edu and Arteta, can't be understated. I have to say, when I saw it, first of all, I did think to myself, I wonder what that means for Arteta's future. I can't lie, because I just feel Edu was very key to helping to transform the culture at Arsenal. He was key to advocating for the power that Arteta has at Arsenal. He's been key to acquiring a lot of the good players that Arsenal have, the rising stars.
And getting rid of some as well with the Aubameyang situation.
As well. So with him gone, and it has to have been a fantastic project to tempt him away, because Arsenal they're not, underneath London Bridge, they're all right. So I think as far as Arteta's future is concerned, it has set me thinking. We'll know more, obviously, in the coming days and weeks, but certainly that did sort of cause my eyebrows to go up.
And if maybe we looked at the Arsenal game, they're taking on a Newcastle side who are capable of doing that, particularly with Isak, who incidentally is now being linked with Arsenal, as is often the way. But you look at that, Newcastle can do that at St James's Park. The City result was a much bigger shock, even though we know that Bournemouth have got a good record against teams at the top end of the table.
Yeah, I think for both Arsenal and City to lose in the same weekend, there's probably good odds that won't, or not good odds.
How many days was it, Darren?
4,284 days.
2,400.
6 years.
Was it the other way around? I did something like that.
Those numbers. I mean, I think probably... I think it just reflects how many good teams are in the Premier League just now. We've spoken about that before. And there's actually a lot of great managers who've had time at clubs like Bournemouth, given time to make consistent change. I think when they got the result against Arsenal, everyone was surprised, and now they've gone and backed it up with a result against City. So incredible from them, and also by doing it in a way of scoring great goals and playing great football. I think both City and Arsenal are feeling a little bit hurt by various things, and they're probably suffering a little bit. And nobody, if you consider them favourites, no one else wants to give them that nurturing. They're going to have to find their own way, and probably it is that emotional and mental part of the game where when you're in this condensed period of fixtures, which is probably the first time this season the fixture load has started to increase quite a lot. You've got internationals still to play, more Champions League, then the Christmas fixtures are always really exciting for the fans, but for the players, you've got to really grind. And that'll be the biggest test, I think, is the next sort of 8 weeks as we run into Christmas. Can they just find that togetherness, and can they just find the calmness? Because I don't think by any stretch, either. I think still both those teams are right up there as they'll be fine, and they'll go on those runs of win after win. But I think a lot of the neutrals and people like us are like, we're trying to find a few more. See if we can prod the bear a little more.
We want a title race. That's what it is.
Yes.
We want to see everybody going head to head, right? And when they drop points, it feels significant.
Exactly.
When you've had seasons of perfection, having seasons with a few flaws in them. I know it's not what the managers want. It's not what what fans of those teams want.
I think you make an interesting point, though, Kels, because I think normally, I remember the season where Leicester beat City 5-2 in the October or November of the first half of the campaign. And everyone thought at the time, not only were they not going to win it, but maybe Guardiola might not stay because he hadn't signed his new contract. And he went on to sign his contract, and they went on to have one of those runs in the second half of the season where they just demolished everybody. But this is where that jeopardy comes in, there is no Rodri. They did it with Rodri, and each time they've managed to put together that run, they've done it with Rodri. If you look at the stats, 5 of the last 10 games they've played in the Premier League, they've conceded the first goal. So they don't have that protection for you guys at the back. And I think that's significant with this title race. Instinctively, I want to say, well, this is what happens in the first half of the season, but second half, they kill everyone. I don't know if that's going to be the case this time around.
Yeah, and you're right. If you look at history, it would tell you that they do kind of start to pick up. But if they're going to do that without Rodri, it sort of comes back to the point that we're starting to touch on with Arsenal, which is managers who want control of games. And that's something that Rodri gives Manchester City. In that kind of... I don't know. This is just me asking a selfish question. Is it time for teams to embrace the chaos a bit more? Because I feel like in the absence of Klopp, Liverpool have gone into a more controlled way of playing under Arne Slot. Pep wants perfection. We know that he's talked about it. Arteta is a kind of disciple of Pep and is looking maybe for the same thing, which is great if you've got a Rodri in your side. If you haven't, I mean... There's value. No, but there's value in being unpredictable, isn't there?
I think
I'll tell you why. Here's my argument in that thing, which is not purely selfish. When you have slight chaos and unpredictability, that's harder to play against because it means your opponents can't predict what you're going to do next.
I feel like this is the counter of the first 20 minutes when we spoke about United.
Yeah.
Chaos. We need to have a plan. Now we're saying if you have a plan, scrap it.
No, but a plan in which there is freedom, because what we've said about when Manchester United have done well, it's been in those moments where they have been let off the leash and where the players have just gone for it and they've allowed individual talent to come through. This is my campaign for chaos, and it starts right here.
It might be though, because I
not like.
It might be with Manchester City because I mean Bournemouth were fantastic. They showed them enough respect, but they still went at them. Maybe the Arsenal result gave them more belief, but Manchester City might find themselves in that type of situation more often than not now. Because yes, when Rodri's there, he's that protection, he's that calmness. They control the ball, they dominate possession. With him not being there all of a sudden, I feel teams might go to the Etihad or Man City go into their home pitches and go, do you know what? Let's have a go, because I never understand teams that play against Manchester City that sit in a low block. Ultimately, they go 1-0 down in the first 10 minutes and they get beat anyway. Whereas as Bournemouth, to me, looked like, do you know what? And Semenyo was probably the one. Every time he picked up the ball, he went, Kyle Walker, I know how good he is, but every single time I get it, I'm going to go at him. And he was going past people like they weren't there. He was creating problems. And I think more teams moving forward might look at Manchester City and go, yes, ultimately we might get beat, but we're not going to wait to get beat.
No.
You know, take the handbrake off.
And it's a good point, because the last team to beat City weren't Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool is Brentford.
Ivan Toney too.
Oh, Ivan Toney scored
Yeah.
those too. And basically they had the belief to go for them rather than sit back and wait. So as you say, maybe it might just be worth them saying, listen, we don't have the players who would give us that security. Let's just attack. And if it's a tear up, then it's a tear up. But we can't. I certainly think so with Liverpool. And I know we're going to get to that anyway, but I think as far as City are concerned, they've tried Rico Lewis in there to try and replace him. They've tried John Stones in there. They've tried all sorts of permutation. It hasn't worked quite just yet. So it might well be that they buy someone in January and then that will solve the problem because that player will probably be ready-made and maybe it might be Zubimendi who came on for him in the European Championship final for Spain. And maybe they might frustrate Liverpool in doing so. But the fact is that it's either a question of leaning into that chaos or continuing to have games much like the Bournemouth one that could derail their title altogether. Yeah.
I love the idea that Pep Guardiola's not quite found the solution yet, but we might stumble across it on here.
Yeah, and also they have only just lost the one game. They're still pretty good.
Yeah.
Still pretty difficult.
So bad.
to, and I think it's. I think that focus, like Rico Lewis, John Stones, they still do a very good job.
Yes.
I think the one thing we speak about Rodri having control, we speak about him, how good he is in the ball, he helps keep that. He also is the person that in his mind, he's constantly thinking, if we lose it, if we lose it, if we lose it. And you are vulnerable when you have the ball. And often teams try and have the ball to have control, yes, but that split moment when you lose it, that is also as key a moment. And I think that's where those players that fill in, that will be one of the things they have to learn really quickly. How do I have that mindset and how do I have it for a whole game? Not for the most part, not for 80%, but the whole game.
And to your point, if Haaland's header goes in at the end of the game, it's a draw. It's a completely different conversation. They are banging on the door by the end of the match and Bournemouth are hanging on.
And equally, if it hadn't been both Arsenal and Manchester City losing on the same day, it would have less impact. It's the fact that it happened with both of them. And the team to take advantage, just briefly, Darren, were Liverpool, who were a goal down to Brighton. It was nearly the three of them all losing on the same day, but turned it around in the second half. That change in Liverpool's approach at half-time, do you think that's one of the more significant moments that we've seen under Arne Slot this season?
I think you're right, I think it could be a turning point for their season because I expected them to do what they did in the second 45 minutes in the last 10, 15 minutes against Arsenal, and they never did. They never really got out of second gear into top gear, into Klopp 2023 gear, if you like.
Embrace the chaos.
Embrace the chaos. They never did. But
Kelly for chaos.
I should get the invoice on the way to you as well.
Getting T-shirts made up and everything.
But I think as far as Brighton are concerned, they overwhelmed them. They came from everywhere. They played to their strengths. They made it really difficult. They pressed Brighton really high to win the ball back. And all of those elements that really unsettled Brighton, that hadn't been there in the second half, they are what enabled them to win.
Does it have a massive impact on the title race this weekend, do you think?
Maybe not so for Manchester City because they're always there or thereabouts. So they know exactly what they're doing all the time. But maybe for Arsenal and the fan base and the players, they might look to that and go, yes, Man City lose, but Liverpool win again. And you just wonder how much kind of pressure, and even with the injuries Arsenal have got, you hope it doesn't happen, but you wonder if maybe they're looking at two of those players going, we might bring you back sooner than maybe we intended to, just simply because of the situation that
when
Arsenal
you're a
find
player and
themselves
that
in.
happens, do you want to come back? Do you not want to come back? Are you worried about your body? Do you trust
Well, you always
yourself?
want to play, don't you? And that's probably the decision needs to be taken away from the players, because as players you always want to play.
Yeah, give it to the professionals who know what they're doing. As the official Ange Postecoglou fan account on this programme, Spurs' 4-1 win over Aston Villa was kind of, it was symbolised at times the best of everything that we see under Ange Ball. In the second half, that even when it comes to decisions like taking Son off on 55 minutes. I know he was coming back from injury, but Son was not happy. That was not something that he was warned about. There were big decisions in that game. He made he makes a lot of half-time substitutions. Didn't, but made some quite early substitutions in the second half and went for it. And they win 4-1 against a team that they're going to be competing for, you'd imagine, for a Champions League spot come the end of the season. Yeah,
it was certainly a standout statement with the performance and the way that they dispatched with Aston Villa. I mean, the big decision taken off Son, but I get it with the injuries, and you never really see that kind of attitude from Son as well. He's such a role model for that football club as well, and rightly so. But even with the Maddison one, taking him off, then leaving him out, he's made big decisions, but more than not, he seems to get the decisions right, because look at the performance, because I never saw that result coming. I thought it would be quite cagey, quite close, and ultimately I expected Villa to win that game, because I almost feel like Villa are further along their journey under Unai than where Spurs are. But fair play to Wange, and I think you'll get these type of results. I think you'll get results where they'll beat teams 4-5, but you also get results where they get beat, just because simply the way that they play. But it's insane. It's so entertaining.
But is that okay for Spurs across the course of a season if they have an up and down season, but eventually they're going for a Champions League spot at the end of it, and Ange Postecoglou wants them to win a trophy? So I would always win a trophy in my second season. They've got through to the quarterfinals of the Carabao Cup. Is that enough for them? That was your beat for a long time.
It was absolutely, and I was lucky enough to kind of be in press conferences where you talked about what the expectations of the Spurs fans are, and yes, in a word, I think it is. If they were to win the League Cup, for example, this season, that's a good season for them, because it's their first.
And Champions League football? And
Champions League football, although that would probably be a better season for Daniel Levy than it would be for the fans would love it, but I think that would be the expectation.
And they'd love next season.
And exactly.
With the fixtures, yeah.
But I think as far as winning the league, and they've been very fortunate with the draws, because at home they are very strong. And they've been playing the way that he wants to play, which is that high line with the fullbacks bombing forward. I think where he's been very fortunate is that a lot of the decisions that he's made have come off. So, taking Son off, Son can't argue when the team goes on to win 4-1. And I think psychologically for the team and the fans, that was very important, winning 4-1, because there has been this belief that's been allowed to fester that Son carries that team on his back. So they needed to really have that victory yesterday in order to convince fans that that's not necessarily the case, that in terms of the goals being scored when Son was off the pitch. But would the League Cup and a top 4 place be enough? Yes.
Yeah, it'd be huge. I think it'd be massive. I mean, for them to win a trophy and get Champions League football, I mean, that's the perfect season.
Absolutely.
But I do think the way that they play, I think it can happen. But if it doesn't happen, almost what's next? Because at some point, all the top managers in the world, around the world, even in this country, Pep, Klopp when he was here, Arteta, these guys, Unai Emery, they can adjust.
Yeah.
Whereas as Ange has been quite stubborn with the way that, well, I'm not going to adjust. This is what we do and this is the way that we play. Now, if that brings success and they do win a League Cup, finish in the top 4, Spurs fans will be like, fantastic. But even now, there are some sections of Spurs fans that are like, well, we need a plan B, because they're not quite sure playing this kind of chaotic football will get them ultimately where they want to go, and that's competing for the top.
So is it, and I know I've been kind of making chaos jokes now, but is it necessarily a chaotic kind of football, or is it just a very attacking style of football? Do you think it is chaotic?
A little bit, and the reason why I say that is because certainly for defenders and the way that they like transition, you want there to be some form of protection. Now, I'm not saying this is the full cause of it, but when you look at someone like Mickey van der Ven, who's had serious hamstring problems, it's because every single time you see his recovery runs, he's having to absolutely bust the gut to get back in. Now, for me, that's not composed defending. That's not kind of calculated defending, where you're kind of in a position where, OK, if this happens, at least we've got a set shape there where there's more bodies there. That's just almost like one-to-one defending. I mean, Rachel, you're a defender, so I don't think that's good when your centre-half, every single time they lose the ball, is having to bust the gut to get back in.
Yeah, you're normally trying to avoid those foot races, whereas the approach almost leads to, well, we'll get in foot races, but if we have quick enough players, we'll win them, so we'll be fine. But there is a massive tactical structure to what he wants. It's just a very aggressive and front-footed system. And I think it's taken a little bit of time for the players to fully adjust to it. I do think it's really, really effective. Even that, we speak about their away form isn't as good, but that sort of 3-2 defeat against Brighton, the first half, away from home, they were excellent. They sort of let themselves drop off, and I think ultimately then they lost the momentum, and then because the momentum swung in Brighton's favour and they've got so much quality, eventually they didn't win the game, and that's frustrating for fans. But I still think it's Ange's system, and he truly believes it can be effective, and I really enjoy watching it.
So my question, because he has been successful where he's been before, but they've not been leagues with the strength. And Celtic are a huge club, but the Scottish Premiership is not as strong as the Premier League. So the question is, can he do it where he's not got the best group of players in the league? And can he do it where he's in a stronger league? Does it work? Can that style of football be successful outside of those conditions?
Well, I think that's why there's quite a bit of pressure on what he is able to achieve this season and potentially next season. And he has put additional pressure on himself by saying he wins a trophy in that second season. So we're hotly anticipating will that happen or not. I think it can be effective. And I also think as much as right now his job is with Spurs and with his current group of players, there also is a likelihood that he's not going to be at Spurs for forever. And in a selfish way, all managers are trying to refine and improve themselves. And I think, you know, for managers to change their style and system, some feel that's not helping them develop.
Going back to the question you asked me about being on the beat, when I used to be in the press conferences, what he would say was that he grew up watching the Liverpool sides of his youth, and him basically seeing the fullbacks bomb forward and wanting the dynamism that saw that club impose themselves on the opposition, and that's what he wants to be able to do in an ideal world with his Tottenham team. I still think there are more players to get into his team for him to play exactly the way he wants Spurs to play. But I think that that's his ideal, to get to a place where his team can do that on a consistent basis and not just beat teams at home, but in that little graphic we saw at the bottom right-hand corner, beat the likes of Ipswich away, beat the likes of Brighton away, because it's the away defeats that have really hurt them. They'd have 6 points if they'd have beat those teams that they'd been expected to beat, and then they'd be so much higher up the table.
Yeah, Solanke, though, back on goal-scoring form, couple of goals for him.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd had a shot on target in the previous 6 games before this one. But those 2 goals, because I know Ange Postecoglou tells everybody and tells Dominic Solanke, it's about other stuff. It's about the other stuff you do in the game. It's not just goals. But goals are very nice and important.
Of course they are, yeah, for his own confidence as well, for the team ethos as well, if he's scoring goals and Spurs are doing well. But I think he's almost a perfect centre-forward for Tottenham, the way that he plays, the way he presses, in possession, out of possession, that physical presence up top as well, and he's adding goals as well. So I've always been a big fan of Dominic Solanke. I think the moves before came too early. Being at Chelsea, then going to Liverpool, he wasn't ready for Liverpool at that particular time. He's gone away, as you said quite rightly earlier, went to Bournemouth, did really well. Even took him a while to find himself in the Premier League with Bournemouth, had that season, last season, where he was fantastic, and now he almost feels like, right, I'm ready to go at Tottenham. And he's probably thinking now, and it's not selfish to say that, but he probably wants to score goals for Tottenham, and he's probably thinking, he's had a taste of Chelsea, had a taste of Liverpool, he wants to get back to that level there, playing at the top level, and there's no reason why he can't.
What is it you like about him, then?
Everything. His movement. He always seems to be in the right place at the right time, and even when he misses chances, I don't really put too much emphasis on that, because the fact that he's in that position to miss the chances, I think, is a positive. I think when you're not getting the opportunities, that's when you have to worry, because you think, where am I going wrong? What am I doing in and around the box? But every single time the ball flashes across the box, he seems to be there, or he puts it in the net. And I just think there's so many different strings to his bow in terms of his finishing. He's good in the air, he can score goals, that if he was to improve even one part of his game, whether it be finishing, that could take him to the next level, because he's got everything else.
Yeah, because the first goal was that fantastic ball in from Son just before he was subbed off, but the second one, the movement was, it was kind of...
Exactly, and that's what you want. I mean, those goals there, the one from Richarlison, he puts it in the empty net. If you find yourself in that situation, in that position on the pitch, that's an extra 5-6 goals a season without even thinking about it, just little tap-ins. And I wish more centre-forwards would do that, because we put so much emphasis on the perfect goal. They are the perfect goals for me.
Yeah, perfect striker's goal.
100%.
Get yourself in that position. Get yourself in the... They don't say Pomo anymore, do they? It's antiquated, but I still like it. It's very pleasing to say, very pleasing.